There, tell me. Well, as Lang mentioned, I'm going to give a talk tonight about freedom, law, and the order of creation. But a few little things first. This room, the restaurant just wants to get a total of about $100 out of us tonight. So what we'll do is near the end of the event, we'll check with the restaurant. Because there's enough of us here having coffees, we'll be very, very close. If we're 10 or 20 bucks short, there'll be a suggestion if you want to leave a donation of a loonie or a toonie on the table, whatever, so we can make up the difference. That's kind of how we'll roll. That's what we've been doing at Coffee Chat as well. If you have cell phones, you're free to leave them on. Just maybe take the conversation outside. And the washrooms are over here somewhere too. Well, just for your information. I'm going to speak rather candidly tonight about this topic. I had planned to do a video presentation with slides, but I found that in about half an hour to a 40-minute period, it might be overwhelming, the information. So I want to just stick to the very basics, go as short as I can on this, and then allow an opportunity for questions and answers afterwards. Because I'm not sure how people will receive this, or where people are with this idea. Freedom, law, and the order of creation. I'm going to address all three of these in that order, and then I'm going to attempt to pull them all together so they make sense at the end. We can see that these we often think of as somewhat related. This one here, maybe it looks out of place a little bit, but I'm hoping to bring that in towards the end. I'll start off with freedom and a question to everybody here. Who here either likes freedom, would like more freedom, or likes the whole idea of freedom? Show of hands. Pretty much unanimous. So it's a good topic to talk about then. Actually, I'm going to say that freedom, if we look at why it is that we do what we do, why it is that we make money, why it is that we strive for what we strive for in life, if we look deep behind it all, one of those things that we want in life is freedom. And I would say that this is an inherent characteristic of all of living creatures. I'll just tell a few stories to try to exemplify what I'm talking about here as an example. Back in the summer, I was working up at a place called Farm in the Dell up in Aberdeen. And they have kind of like a petting zoo. They got all kinds of weird animals there, alpacas and funny little things like Vietnamese pigs and whatnot. And they have these things called bantam chickens. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They look like a little domesticated partridge, cutest little things. But they're a little bit more wild than regular chickens. And they like to run free range. The problem is that they lay their eggs in the hay mow. And up there they just got those old square bales, because it's a small operation. And what would happen is they'd pull their bales down and there'd be eggs falling on the ground, breaking open, and then the mice causing a problem with that. So they had to do is they caught the bantam chickens, clipped their wings, and put them in with the regular chickens, which had a house and a fence. And I was working there for about a week, and that whole week those bantam chickens, they ran around and around and around, like poking their heads out, constantly trying to get out. It's like I could see that they wanted freedom. They had been restrained. But then this last week I was up there working, and it was mild. The chickens were out around and so on, and the bantams, they looked just like the regular chickens then. They got to the point where they realized it's no longer in use, so they died right down. Another example, and somebody in here was wondering what this jar was for. I have multiple purposes for it, but I've got fleas in here tonight. Just kidding, I don't, but it's an example of how... Somebody told me that if you take a flea, and a flea is I don't know if they live around here or not, but out on the West Coast they have them, and they'll jump about so high, they'll jump right onto a dog when he's running by. And apparently if you take a flea and you put it in here, and you put some small holes so it can breathe, it'll start jumping, it'll try to get out. And after a period of time, it will stop jumping. It's not dead, it'll just stop jumping. To the point where you can take the lid off and walk around and it won't jump out. It's been conditioned. The freedom has been conditioned out of it. The third example is, and I'm sure you've all heard this before too, is of an elephant. A zoo elephant. You take a baby elephant, you put a ring around its leg, a strong ring, and a chain, and a big heavy post. And it will tug and tug and tug for a while. After a while, it won't anymore. To the point where you can actually then take the large elephant as it grows up, put a small stake and a little chain, and the elephant will stay there. But apparently, if there's a fire or something really freaks the elephant, and it forgets that it's tied up and it bolts, it can never be used in the zoo again. It's ruined, because now it knows that that was just a fake form of bondage. And I would say that it's the same with us. We've gotten ourselves into a web, in a way, almost like a fly. And by little step after step after step, we've gotten ourselves woven deeper and deeper and deeper into a web. Now, I'm going to ask the question, maybe just throw it out on the floor for a few answers. What is freedom? Does anybody have an answer for? There's no necessarily a defined answer, but does anybody have an impression of what freedom is? Jim?
Yes. No schedule. Money's flowing, so you have no worries. That's total freedom. Right? Wake up, do what you want.
All right, do what you want.
Live life as
Ron?
The freedom to be what you were meant to be.
What you're meant to be. Okay. Brian?
The ability to act out whatever you want to act upon without being restricted beyond your own physical human limitations.
Right, all good
And
answers.
decision by yourself.
Decision by yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody take decision for you.
So it's like a capacity, right? We're born with capacities that we can carry on with. That's kind of what it is, and it's like the chicken, when I saw it, it had the capacity and the ability to go wherever it wanted, so it took advantage of that. But as soon as that was restricted, it was still trying to. It was still trying to exercise its capacity, but then that got beat out of it after a while. There's a guy named Larkin Rose down in the States. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. He wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition. And it's a superstition that, like the elephant, somehow what binds us is actually real. The elephant believes that this tiny little rope on its leg can stop it from moving, but it's not true. Well, we, in this most dangerous superstition, have gotten the belief, the conditioning, that somehow we're restricted in some way. Now, I'm going to paint a picture here. And by the way, I'm not trying to teach anybody anything here. I'm not trying to say that what I'm telling you is the truth. This is just some of my experience and what I've learned and what I see. But I also say, if anybody has any interest in this sort of thing, do your own research, for sure. I'm going to paint a picture about myself and how I got into the web. And I'm going to say that it's my suspicion, anyways, that many people in this room are in the same situation. What happens is that when we're born, I'm talking right now, not so much from the spiritual side of things, but actually our existence here as living and breathing human beings, flesh and blood human beings. I'm talking about that position of us at this moment. When we were born, our mothers, typically our mothers, because our mothers, when we're born, are the safest witness. Who else can bear witness to a child being born more so than the mother? If the mother dies during childbirth or something like that, then somebody else would make the report. But generally it's the mother. And depending where we're born, what political jurisdiction that we were supposed to have been born into, there's a form that actually the mother is usually coerced into signing. And where I was born, the political jurisdiction that coerced my mother was called the Province of Ontario. And over there it's called a statement of birth. And it's a form that's got a bunch of blanks on it. And Mom filled it in. And I was able to get a copy of it, of the original, in my mother's handwriting, and making mistakes and so on. That's where it all begins. And what happens is that this gets sent into a department of the government, and what comes back after a few weeks is another document called a birth certificate. And what's interesting is that when I went to order this one, when I went to order a copy of this one, they really discouraged me from getting it. They didn't want me to have this, it appeared. They discouraged me 3 times till I finally had to ask, are you telling me I cannot have this? And that's when they said, oh no, you can have it. But now I see that Lang is getting his, and they're creating more hoops to jump through to get this, because this is a very dangerous document in the mind of the mind control people, which I'll talk about later, because this here identifies us as a living being. It says on here that I was a living child, essentially. This does represent that. This, on the other hand, is a different document. But I was told when I ordered this that this is a birth certificate. It's the same as this. But when I got it, I realized it's a completely different document. First of all, this one is called a birth certificate. This one's called a statement of birth. And in some provinces, it's called a statement of live birth, or record of live birth. It's got a different registration number. This one is created by my mother, because my mother is the signatory. That's who creates the information. That's the one who creates it. And it's actually printed in my mother's handwriting. This one, on the other hand, is printed by, in fine print, it says, the Canadian Banknote Corporation. That's what's on the bottom of the birth certificate. That's who printed it, the Canadian Banknote Corporation. Not really sure who that is. But also it says on the bottom that it's a certified extract from birth registration. It doesn't say the birth registration. It doesn't say what birth registration. And this is not a registration, by the way. This is not a registration. It says it right on it. It says that it's a permanent record. It's not a registration. And if you contact the Vital Statistics, they'll tell you they do not register babies. They document events. That's all this is. This is an event. It's a statement of birth. And birth is an event. But this, on the other hand, it's also different in some ways. The name on here, there's given name. Surname and given name on this. This one just says name. It doesn't identify what kind of a name it is. Because, and the reason I believe they don't want us to have this, is because anything that's given becomes what's known as property. And so therefore anybody who uses that name without permission is trespassing. However, this one does not say given name. It's created by a different entity than this. And I'll go very briefly into law at this point, but I can come back to this as well. The reason this starts us into the entanglement, the difference of these two, is because in law, there's something called contract. Contract. There's different forms of contract law. There's corporate law, and there's also trust law. What trust law is you have the main 2 players in trust law is a grantor and a trustee. I know that's what I mean. This can get into a little bit more detail. This can get a little bit detailed. But I want to keep it really, really basic. What happens is if somebody creates something, that's generally recognized in most societies as the one who created it is like the owner of it. The creator of this is my mother. She didn't create the blank form, yes, but the blank form is worth nothing until it has information. She filled out the information and signed it. She's creating that information, and she's the one who created the name and gave it to me. So she's the creator of this, and she gives it in trust to a department. So the relationship with this document is my mother is the grantor, the government office is the trustee, and a trustee becomes a servant. They're entrusted to do the bidding of the one who granted it. Does everybody understand that? That relationship? It's a contract. The reason I feel they don't give us a copy of this back is because they create something which is a fraud, basically. We don't know it. They created it. The signature on this one is the Deputy Registrar and the Registrar General. Those are the two signatures on it. It's created by a department of the government, at the province of Ontario actually, and it's printed by the Canadian Banknote Corporation, and they send it back to us. When it comes in a letter, I don't think they do it anymore, but they used to say, this is not to be used for identification purposes. They do that, I believe, to prevent plausible, or to create plausible deniability. If we figure out that it's a fraud, and it got us in trouble, and they can say, no, we told you not to use it for identification purposes. But yet when we go to get all of our other certificates, what do we use? We use this. And we were told not to use it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show the difference in law. Where's my eraser? I had a dryer. There it is. I'm going to take some of this off. Actually, all of this off for now. By the way, I want to give credit where credit is due here. I'll mention for now, a lot of this stuff has come from guys like Larkin Rose, Mark Stevens, Dean Clifford, and a few others, which I can, anybody who's interested, I can give you the names later at the end. But because a lot of this stuff I've learned from them, but I've also had experience, a little bit of experience in court as well. Basically what we have here in these two different documents is we have two different persons. We have a natural person and a legal person. And the reason I say natural is because with this one here, and when I say person, it's like a mask of what we are. Everybody here is okay with us. The human body is not really fundamentally what we are. Is that okay with everybody? There's more to us. So all the trappings that we have, the body, and we have the identifiers, like our name becomes like a title. When a ship is launched, when it's christened, they actually affix a name to the hull of the ship. So the name is attached to the body essentially, because all the other identifiers on this form are the weight, the sex, this sort of thing. These are things to do with a body. So the name is attached to the body. So on here, this is representing a natural person because it uses words like child and living. So it's a natural person. This, however, there's no indication of life here whatsoever. It's a name, a registration number, and a birthplace, and a few things like that, but there's no indication that there's actually life on this. And it's also spelled differently. So the difference is that this is living, this is unknown. We're not told what it is. But there's actually evidence, if you research far back enough, the scheme that was devised for this was to render us dead, actually. But that's for another story. This over here, on this side we have rights. On this side we have privileges. Now, privileges are not the same as rights. Privileges can be removed, taken away. Rights are inherent. They're what is sometimes referred to as inalienable or inalienable. They can't be liened. You know what a lien is? Mm-hmm. A lien is to abridge the rights. They cannot be abridged. They're inherent. Therefore, this here is, and this has duties as well. And this here is free. And the reason it's confusing sometimes, you see, there's things like human rights come up, where there's statements like people are born free. And then people don't understand, if we're born free, how is it that we can be bossed around by mind control organizations and tax and all that? It's because we're operating through this, through an office, if you will. And they're almost completely opposite in so many ways. But I'll go for now into the order of creation, because that really helps us to see how we've dug ourselves into the web and the possible remedy for us to get out of that web. What we are is, most people would agree, is we're man. What I mean by mankind in general, right? And off to the parallel, or beside us, this man is made up of men and women. Everybody would agree we're all on the same plane. There's nobody created lesser or greater than us. We're all created equal in possibility. When I say order of creation, I'm going to go down this way, and then we're going to look the other way for a moment later too. All these different men and women, we all have this creative capacity within us to create things. So for example, when I was born, my mom created a document. It's called a statement of birth. She created that. State. So as you can see, whatever we create is below us. It's not above us. It comes, it's there to serve us. If you think about it, anything we make, anything we create, is there to serve us. And one of the things that man creates is government. Now you might wonder why it is that government seems to be above us sometimes. Well, the reason for that is because man then enters government and operates from that. And then what happens is man operating through government, in offices of government, creates departments, which creates corporations, which are corpses that are an extension of government, given license from government. And from the departments there's ministries. And from these ministries there's things like municipalities. And then there's offshoots from there. There's permits. There are licenses. And certificates of some sort. Each one of these come with their trappings of obligations and privileges. So what happens is that men and women inject themselves into these. They take on, and they usually often come with trappings. It's like an act that's going on. And you know they're actors very often because they wear costumes. You notice that especially if they get higher levels, they wear even more decorated costumes. They call them uniforms, but it's really what they are. And so what happens is we can see when we have a certificate or a license or a permit, we see that it's like an office that we assume. And when we assume that office, then we are subject to the control of government. And the deeper and deeper and deeper we go, we descend into what I call the hell of subjugation. the deeper we go. It's like man has constantly tried to solve his problems by making more and more and more stuff and going deeper and deeper and deeper into structures which are not really what he is. And then the funny thing of it is that we have this idea of why do we have less freedom? Why does our freedom seem to be getting stripped away and stripped away? So let's create something else to try to save us. Let's try to create something else to try to save us. Let's try to create something else to let us save us. What I'm going to propose here is that because we have a creative nature, and because we have everything that we have, the freedoms that we have, the inherent desire for freedom, and because we are creative, then where does that come from? Well, I'm going to say that, first of all, I'm just going to give you an idea of how I think sometimes. I extrapolate things. Even though I have no evidence in things, I have faith in certain things. Because it makes sense. For example, I have no evidence that there's tomorrow. Does anybody here have any concrete evidence that there's tomorrow? See, nobody has any evidence that there's tomorrow. So what we do is we extrapolate. In other words, we recognize a pattern or a trend that's been going on and on and on and on and on. Then we say, okay, then it'll probably happen tomorrow. What I notice here is that because of man's capacity to create and create and create and create and create and create, that creative aspect has to come from somewhere. And to recognize that we are created, then if we are created, then there must be creative force, call it whatever you want. There has to be something which is supreme to man. And that is where our freedom is coming from. I'm going to propose, rather than always looking towards government, towards departments, and towards constitutions, and all sorts of things, to try to find out what our freedoms and rights are. My suggestion, although it may sound a little bit backwards, is to look to where our nature has come from. And that's where we'll find our true freedom. Because at that point, we recognize, just like everything that we create to serve us. We recognize, when we recognize that we are created, then we must be created to serve. We must be, if this is created to serve this, then this is created to serve this. And when we do that, all of this becomes irrelevant to us. It all becomes powerless over us. And even organizations like government recognize this when we point it out to them. They certainly do. Even in the criminal codes of Canada, for example, it says that when somebody is in ministry of this, none of these regulations apply. Period. A man in service to this cannot be stopped or interrupted by any of these regulations. It's right in the Criminal Code of Canada. There's a recognition that this is supreme. I'm not giving any name to this because everybody comes from different persuasions. But what I'm saying is that true freedom, and that was the real essence of what I'm talking about tonight, is freedom. It all flows by law. The creative force flows by law, where it's like a law. What I'm saying by law is, I'll step back again a little bit. I know I'm jumping around here a little bit. Law, there's different aspects of law, but there's not really. There's real law, which is things that we can't change. Law means laid down. Gravity is law, for example. It applies here, it applies in China. It doesn't matter. All these regulations that come from here are just, these are rules and regulations. They're not law. They're called law, but they're not law. Can I just, I'm almost finished. Yeah. The other kind of law is the whole contract. That's stuff that we agree to. And that's where these sorts of things come in. It's all just agreements. That's what we agree to. I'll wrap it up then by saying that my purpose tonight was not to necessarily give a whole bunch of information on this sort of thing, but to help people to start to question the superstitions that have built up within us. That was the main point. And also, to make the point that if we are created, I mean, we could all say, okay, our parents created us, perhaps, but do they really know what's going on with all those trillions of cells and all those? There's a power that's working through. They're like a vessel that they're working through, that we are created. And even in this moment, there's billions, even just in the body, I'm just talking about that aspect of us. Even within the body, there's billions of operations going on, and we're completely unconscious of it. But yet we're created. So to me, it defies logic to say that we're created and we don't have a creator or a creative essence. So that's the other thing I wanted to do, was to help people look at the superstition and also to see our relationship. It's a relationship. This is created to serve us. We're created to serve this. And what I've noticed too is that in history, the little history that I have read, what I've noticed is that every time that man loses sight of this, they go deeper and deeper into the mirth and into the problems of this, and it never seems to end well. It ends in chaos and destruction. And then people wake up again and go back to service of that which creates them. If we look back to what creates us, then we see where true freedom comes from. And we then express a spirit of gratitude for the life that we have, and a spirit of gratitude for all of this as well, because this is all here to help us to wake up. When this starts to hurt enough, eventually we start to look back from whence we came. And I would say that when we start to look back at where we come, what we start to do is we start to experience the manifestation of this, which is our conscience. It's like something starts speaking to us, truths, and we start to live by our conscience. That seems to be the manifestation. It's like an inner calling that starts to happen. And as such, we begin to live as free men and free women, living by our conscience and in service of the creative force, which is expressed through our free will. That's what I have to say tonight. If anybody has any further questions on this, in terms of even all of this, I brought some documentation here tonight which I can read to you or show you, and just to fortify some of the things I've said. I know it was a little brief. Anybody? Yeah. I can probably turn this off now, I guess, eh?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.